Life in Japan is getting harder for everyone, and the government isn't really doing anything to help. They are doing one thing right now. They're tightening the requirements for visas and making it harder to immigrate. They could even make it so I get sent home to the US without my family. Honestly, it's getting to the point where saying, learn Japanese and move to Japan, feels like I'm scamming people or something. So instead of wallowing in my own anxiety about being deported, let's see what's been going on in Japan the last 10 or 20 years to see if there's any reason to panic. Hello, I'm Tom Scullen, a language teacher living in Japan, and welcome to Like My Anime, the podcast where we use financial anxiety and growing xenophobia to talk about Japanese media, language learning, and life in Japan. So I've been watching the new Ghost in the Shell, Chainsmoker Cat, and Smoking Behind the Supermarket with You this summer. All great anime. But that got me thinking, life in Japan for people with money is way different from life for the working class. Well, that and the government is trying to use foreigners as a scapegoat right now. They need to explain why the average person's quality of life has been going down across the country, and they don't really have a good answer. Before we get into this, I feel like I need to head off any bad faith comments. My life is here in Japan. My family is in Japan. I love Japan. I love living in Japan precisely because of the opportunities Japan has given me. Hell, this entire podcast and YouTube channel are dedicated to how much I love Japanese media, culture, history, and the Japanese language itself. So we can skip the if you don't like it, leave, or foreigners shouldn't talk about Japanese politics comments. If I didn't care about Japan and what happens to Japanese people, I wouldn't be making this episode. I'd just do it on Rent a Girlfriend or some other slop. So what's been happening? We could go all the way back to the late 80s and the end of Japan's financial boom era. The following 30 years of stagflation didn't help anything either. But like with most problems in the 2020s, this all stems from COVID. Well, since the 2010s, it's always either COVID or Gamergate, but I think the internet chuds are off the hook for this one. So back in 2020, Japan locked the whole country down, instead of forcing residents to go on lockdown, like a lot of other countries did. It just stopped people coming in. Because of this, even permanent resident visa holders were barred from re-entering the country. For about a year, they couldn't come home, while Japanese citizens were basically allowed to freely come and go as they pleased. And tourists weren't allowed back until October of 2022. Currently, only 17.8% of Japanese citizens have a passport, down from the all-time high of about 24% before the pandemic. And anecdotally, my students and even some coworkers are uninterested in the world beyond Japan. That's been a noticeable trend over the last 7 or 8 years. Western music and culture has basically no sway anymore. Back in 2019, there were a lot more students that wanted to study or travel abroad because they were into Marvel movies or Ariana Grande or something. Now I have to make explicit rules barring students from choosing Japan whenever we do what country do you want to travel to speaking activities. Despite a seeming lack of interest from Japanese people in the outside world, Japan has never been more popular for foreign tourists. Foreign tourism obviously cratered during COVID, but has been on an upward trend since 2011. 2024's 37 million tourists was just a return to that trend. But at the same time, over 42 million foreign tourists visited Japan in 2025, and over 21 million have already visited in 2026. And the majority of those people are just going to Tokyo and Kyoto. But thanks to this tourism surge, Japan is only just now breaking into the top 10 for total yearly foreign tourists. It hardly compares to number 1 France and their 102 million visitors in 2025. But Japan doesn't really have the infrastructure for this volume of tourism, whether that's foreign or domestic. Like somehow, despite Kyoto drowning in tourists, their city government is still struggling to balance the books. But tourism can't be the only reason Japan is struggling right now, right? A surge in tourism is just a symptom caused by the fact that the yen is weaker than it's been in 40 years. So why is the yen so weak? So like with tourism, COVID did a number on the Japanese economy. And also like with tourism, it started as kind of a blessing, but now things are getting out of hand. In 2020 and 2021, the yen was actually really strong. The Japanese economy had been stagnant for 30 years, so a little global pandemic wasn't going to throw it into a recession. Plus, the government had been trying to manufacture a recession the whole time, so if it did happen, then all the better. But since Japanese banks had 0% interest on loans and 0% return on their bonds for so long, two things happened. First, the Japanese government started buying up its own debt in the form of bonds. Nobody's going to buy a bond with no return, so the government stepped in. Shinzo Abe and now his disciple Sanae Takaichi just love spending money, and this helped them do that. To the point now, Japan is the largest holder of Japanese debt. But that also means the Bank of Japan, or BOJ, couldn't raise interest rates. The debt payments could risk bankrupting the nation. And because the BOJ wasn't raising rates to combat post-COVID inflation the way the US and Europe were, currency investors started to sell their yen. Now, over the past 2 years, the BOJ has managed to get interest rates up to about 2%. And in the same time, there's been a wage price spiral. That is to say, an increase in the cost of living in Japan has forced employers to raise incomes, which then lets companies raise prices on goods. So yeah, Japan finally has positive interest rates and inflation for the first time in decades. And wages are rising faster than inflation. Everything is all good, right? Well, not quite, because of the other thing that's been happening, the yen carry trade. So very basically, because I'm not sure if I understand it, since banks have had zero or even negative interest for so long, companies and governments would buy yen. Then they'd convert it to dollars or some other stronger currency and invest it in something more profitable. Because of this one weird trick banks don't want you to know, Japan is currently the largest holder of US debt too. In May of 2026, the BOJ started selling off US bonds to try and keep the yen from going above 160 yen to the dollar. And that's why US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent freaked and had the US government buy a bunch of yen in August. Selling off US debt would pay down Japanese debt and stabilize the yen. But if Japan sells too much too quickly, it'll drive down the value of the bonds. And it'll also drive up the return investment the US government has to pay to bond holders. That's why the yen is already back up to about 160 yen to the dollar. Unwinding the yen carry trade could crash the world economy, but certainly will destabilize the US. So Japan has a shrinking population, it has an artificially cheap currency, and there are economic and work-life balance issues that make having kids more difficult. So immigration seems like the only alternative, right? Well, that's where you're wrong, Jack. As of this year, there are over 4 million foreign residents in Japan, an almost 50% increase from just last year, and an all-time high. That still only accounts for about 3% of the total population, though, and it doesn't come close to filling the gaps in many industries. But foreigners never have been more visible in society. Between tourists and many foreigners working at convenience stores, they're everywhere. Or at least it feels that way. And that's just unacceptable to many racists. Something had to be done, especially from Sanae Takaichi. She rode a wave of racist populism into office, so her government are aggressively trying to tighten immigration as we speak. And from here on, we're going to talk about prices in yen. Regardless of current exchange rates, the buying power of 100 yen within Japan feels like about $1 to someone in the US. Like a Big Mac meal here is 800 yen, or $8. But someone coming from the US or Europe paying 800 yen with USD, euros, or pounds will pay a lot less. Like at current rates, 800 yen is only $5.04. So to give listeners outside Japan a better idea of the cost of living in Japan, I'll be using the 100 yen to the dollar figure, rather than current exchange rate amounts. This should help give a better idea of how painful the fee increases we're going to talk about feel to someone living and working in Japan. Plus, exchange rates are all over the place right now and constantly changing. So in the 1980s, a law was passed to cap visa-related fees at 10,000 yen, or $100. Then last year, the cap was raised from 10,000 yen to 200,000 yen for most visas and 300,000 yen for permanent residency-related fees. So about $2,000 or $3,000 respectively. Now, a visa, depending on length of stay, will cost anywhere from 33,000 yen to 75,000 yen. So about $330 to $750. And PR is now 200,000 yen, or about $2,000. Now that probably doesn't sound too outrageous, especially compared to English-speaking or EU countries' visa fees. But you have to remember that Japanese wages are ridiculously low. The average wage is about 4 million yen. In Japan, that feels like $40,000 a year, but with current exchange rates, that's a little bit over $25,000 a year. And on top of the fee increases, the government already made it possible to revoke someone's supposedly permanent residency. Now they are making the requirements for getting permanent residency in the first place much harder. First, instead of the average individual's income, an applicant needs to make more than the average Japanese household, or 5.75 million yen. If you happen to be married, then no problem. Your household income just has to be above average. But for single foreign workers, this is basically an impossible task for all but the richest residents. On top of that, the average wage for foreign workers is only 3.6 million yen. And that's the average. Whatever high-income foreigners Japan is after are dragging the average up. Most industries don't pay anywhere near 300,000 yen a month, let alone the almost 480,000 yen a month these new requirements demand. But that's not all, and this is where I get tripped up. Any permanent resident applicant is now required to make 30 years of pension payments, or they have to have enough savings and investment to offset whatever they didn't pay in. It's super unclear how much money the average worker pays into the national pension. There's also a couple different kinds of pension you could be paying into, depending on your job and employment status. So it's also really hard to know how much you need to make up in savings for any time you weren't working and paying taxes in Japan. It's not even clear when this average imagined person started working. Like the age of majority in Japan was lowered from 20 to 18 for most, but not all situations in 2022. But the average college student graduates and enters the workforce at 22. I moved to Japan when I was 29, so do I need to make up 7 years, 9 years, or 11 years of these supposedly unpaid pension contributions? Basically, it feels like a move to make Japan more like Singapore or the Gulf states, especially since the government has started talking about yearly caps on specific visas. They're more than happy to take your labor and taxes, but you need to go back to your own country before the government has to give you anything in return. One silver lining, I guess, is that I'm on a spouse visa, and I don't think they're going to start capping spouse visas, because then they're messing with actual Japanese citizens who can do something about it. But since I don't have the vote, well, since no foreigner has the vote, they can mess with foreign residents all they like. Hell, the Takaichi government could add a rule tomorrow where only people on 5-year visas can even apply for PR. That would easily make permanent residency largely theoretical. And at the same time, they could say, hey, why are you mad at us? China doesn't even have PR. But nobody, even Japanese people, are getting paid the way you would in Singapore or Dubai. So I kind of bit off more than I could chew. The question, why is Japanese society like that, is too big for one episode. There wasn't time to get into a bunch of stuff. Protests against building mosques, or against a proposed immigration program to bring African laborers to specific cities, or the fact there's a rise in loosely organized so-called yami baito, or criminal side jobs, within Japanese citizens. And resellers have gotten so out of hand, you basically can't buy anything anymore. This summer, actually, there's even been a couple of different cases of people stealing fruit so they can resell it. I mean, fruit is really expensive in Japan, but still. Neither of those last two are really related to this discussion, but more an indication of how tough times are right now. People are desperate and struggling. There also wasn't time to get into why Japan needs foreign labor in the first place. People just aren't having kids is the answer, obviously. But the why is a lot more nuanced. So maybe we can come back to the population issues in a future episode. As a dad raising 2 kids in Japan, I feel like I have some opinions. There wasn't even time to talk about how Takaichi's Minister of Harmonious Coexistence with Foreigners, Kimi Onoda, is interesting. She's mixed race, hates foreigners maybe because of her deadbeat American dad, and prefers 2D husbandos to real men, allegedly. Honestly, I don't think I could do an episode on her without violating libel laws in a few different countries, so do your Googles. But yeah, the LDP contains multitudes. Sure, Sanae Takaichi is pretty right-wing, but many business leaders and members of her own party are unhappy with the job she's doing. For an American audience, the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, is if the Democrats and Republicans were just one party. Yes, even the most liberal Americans are still pretty conservative by world political standards. And then there's Sanseito, the far-right party founded by a YouTuber. They aren't happy at all because Takaichi isn't racist enough. The YouTube channel Japanalysis has a great video series on far-right YouTubers that you should definitely watch, and I'll link down in the description. We'll see where everything ends up. Sanae Takaichi wants to be Japan's Margaret Thatcher, but maybe she's Japan's Theresa May. Or, God willing, Japan's Liz Truss could be more accurate. Because I, like many other immigrants in Japan, have nowhere else to go. My whole life is here, for better or worse. But if you're still thinking about moving to Japan, maybe just come as a tourist first. If you're paid in US dollars, pounds, or euros, then you can live like a king for a few weeks every year. And then you'd never have to worry about the political machinations of people desperate for power but unable to govern. The economic realities for Japanese people here in Japan aren't getting better that quickly. For now, wage increases seem to be outpacing inflation, but that all depends on the industry you're in. This will hopefully all blow over, especially once the economic impact outweighs people's xenophobia. Because, yeah, I know Japan is racist is kind of a meme online, but for most people it really does seem to just be ignorance and maybe fear of an unknown future. But will anybody still be around when Japan realizes it does need its foreign-born workers? I don't know. But that's our show, and thank you for listening to Like My Anime. This was a pretty scary episode, if you're an immigrant in Japan anyway. So I'd check out this other episode where I talk about some real Japanese horror stories. There will be links to that episode, all the sources I used for this one, and some additional reading in the description if you're interested. But for now, thank you so much for exploring Japanese culture with me, and I hope you have a great day.